Program we have tonight, NATO. What's wrong with it? Oh, a lot, and we'll hear about that. Our guests include Colonel Ann Wright, who is a former diplomat, as well as Ajamu Baraka, the national organizer for Black Alliance for Peace, and Alice Slater, board member of World Beyond War. So let's go forth with our updates. Jody, tell us about the Poor People's Campaign in Washington.
Sure. Well, maybe I could start with the People Summit that was the week before. And that was thousands of people in the streets of Los Angeles as the counter to the Summit of Americas, the first time that the Organization of American States gathered the countries of Latin America, and Biden disinvited 3 countries. And so it became Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. So it became the summit of exclusion. And we, instead of letting the press sweep that under the rugs, we made it very visible. We did an action right outside the summit with 10 empty chairs for the 10 countries that were not attending. And we listened to voices from around Latin America, powerful, passionate voices, calling for, the democracy, and for Biden not to be calling Latin America his backyard or his front yard, but for Latin America to have its own sovereignty. Medea Benjamin gave an amazing talk about sovereignty also. So you can check it out at peoplesummit2022.org. We were in the streets. We had an amazing, beautiful march together at the end of it. And there's also a final declaration that you can find there that really raises up the vision that came out of everyone coming together and says, we must be in the streets, we must be visible, we must be fighting for the people and for the planet. So we finished that and then transitioned to Washington, D.C., where we had the anti-militarism contingent at the Poor People's Campaign get a convergence on their moral march on Washington. It started with Medea and a bunch of us at the doors of Congress saying, "Let us in, this is the people's house." The people's voices are missing from the conversation inside these halls. And Tig and I got into our member's office, Ted Lieu, who then let us get into Nancy Pelosi's office, where we kind of showed them that they were pointing in one direction. Oh, we can't let you in, they're not letting you in. And then we got it back to them where it's like, it falls on Nancy Pelosi's lap. She is shutting the doors on the people, and we need to call on her to open the doors. Friday night was an amazing vigil at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, honoring the deaths from war, from COVID in the streets of our cities, from the militarism at home. And it was a powerful way to not only start, but then we went to the MLK Memorial and lit it up with our message, which was money for the poor and not for war. The next day were voices of the poor for hours, talking from their hearts and from their experience. And we'd taken over and remade a tank transformed a tank into a space of peace and love, and shared a lot of information about militarism and why it needs to stop, and how it is the root cause of racism and poverty. And being together was quite beautiful. We were part of a 50 member delegation, and we had 250 coalition at the People Summit. So it was fun to be together as a delegation, and with our messaging and with our love and raising our voices and being visible and seeing each other in person. And there's just got to be a lot more of that.
Well, thank you so much, Jody Evans, not only for that report, but for all the organizing. A lot of work went into that summit, and we appreciate all that you do.
That was a great coaching team, and many, many more.
Yes. Let's move over to Medea, who's going to update us on Cuba and Colombia.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So Colombia, I would say an earthquake, but an earthquake is a bad thing. So what do you call it? Like a supercharged celebration with Gustavo Petro winning and his vice president, Francia Marquez, Colombia in its recent history has never had a progressive government. And so this is an amazing, amazing historic change for Colombia, where it has really was the young people and women and the indigenous community that brought this ticket to be the winning ticket. And they have pledged in their campaign all kinds of positive things, from land reform to protecting women's rights, free education. And this will transform Colombia if they don't get stopped in their tracks by the right wing right away. But it will also transform Latin America, which is really moving in an amazingly positive direction. And so when you're depressed about the state of the world or the state of the US or whatever it is, just look towards Latin America, which has such inspiring things happening there. On the Cuba front, we just got back from taking medicines that will save the lives of 8 children who need liver transplants. And it shows the cruelty of the US blockade. We couldn't buy those medicines in the United States. This is for children getting liver transplants, and no bank would let us send the money. We had to take it in cash to Mexico, buy it there, not tell the company it was going to Cuba. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's disgusting. But we did deliver the medicines and went to the hospital and met the wonderful doctors. And we also, at the same time, just managed to get Ayanna Presley's office, and thank you so much to Mappa, Brian, and Cole, and the others for getting her office to take that on. I know you've been moving her very much in the direction of taking on some foreign policy issues, and this was great. Brian, how many signed the letter in the end?
I think it was up 26 or 27, Medea, I believe.
So 27 members of Congress, a letter saying that we wanted cooperation when it came to COVID and other medical issues, that Cuba has done amazing work developing its own vaccines and could make that available to poor countries around the world, but needs the US to not stand in the way. And a wonderful coincidence is that I managed to meet the team of scientists in 3 different institutes that developed the 3 different COVID vaccines, told them about the letter, showed them the letter. They were thrilled by it. They want to invite Ayanna to come to Cuba and visit their research institutes. So it was a beautiful campaign that we did collectively through this CODEPINK Congress. So thank you. We can't hear you, Marcy.
Sorry, I said thank you for all the work that you do. We are trying to keep up. Now let's go to Hania Jodat with an update on the Yemen War Powers Resolution.
Yes, thank you so much, Marcy. So 2 weeks ago, we announced with our audience members that there is a Yemen War Powers Resolution, thanks to the work of all the activists and pressing for this to get done. That was introduced by Reps Peter DeFazio, who represents the 4th District of Oregon, and Pramila Jayapal of Washington's 7th Congressional District, who also serves as the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Now, the resolution now up to date has about 85 co-sponsors. What the bill would do is it would defund the US maintenance of Saudi Air Force and prohibits US intelligence from bombing targets unless Congress authorized a declaration of war within 30 days. 2 of the key players that we want to make sure co-sponsor this bill are Gregory Meeks, who is the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who still hasn't co-sponsored, as well as Adam Smith, who is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. Now, what I will do is I will share the resolution with everyone, go through the list of co-sponsors. If you have not found your your representative, the mission is for us to make as many phone calls, send emails, send letters to ensure that every single one of the members of Congress are on board with this resolution, because it is so critical. It is so important. As we know already, Yemen is one of the largest humanitarian crises, according to the UN. So many children have passed away from starvation, and we just want to make sure that there's an end to this endless war. And I'll hand it to Brian to talk about Saudi, which is another crisis that we need to cover on this call. So
Yes, Brian, tell us what's going on with Biden and Saudi Arabia.
Thanks. And it is very good news that there's a war powers resolution in the House of Representatives right now. Because of recent announcement by the president, he has shown that he absolutely needs to be checked on this issue of Yemen and our nefarious alliance with Saudi Arabia. Tom Baker said in the chat earlier that it's the height of hypocrisy that the Biden administration was disinviting countries from Latin America, while at the same time planning a trip to Saudi Arabia to recognize one of the most regressive countries on earth, with one of the most horrible human rights records, both at home and abroad in the entire world. And this announcement of a trip to Saudi Arabia by President Biden that it's slated to take place in mid-July is really a reversal of his campaign promises. When he was on the campaign trail in front of millions of people on a debate stage, he said he was going to make the leader of Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia a pariah state. And instead, he has not followed through on that. He's sold them billions of dollars worth of weapons. And now he's planning to travel to Saudi Arabia. And the rumors are that he is going to involve the United States in a defense pact with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And, you know, that would commit American lives to defend monarchies in the Middle East. And that is, it's not within the power of the president to do that. It's really executive overreach. Many people are saying that, oh, he's going over there hat in hand to try and lower gas prices. And Medea's right, it won't be a defense pact. That defense word that they use is really just a euphemism for supporting more forever wars. President Biden promised he was going to end forever wars, and now he's committing us to the foreign policy of countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. You know, it really doesn't make sense, and it's politically a very bad move. This is a continuation of Donald Trump's policy, and you know, the administration really needs to hear it from constituents saying, "This is not what we want. This is not what you promised." And you need to change course immediately, because this threatens things like the Iran nuclear deal. It threatens to draw us back into conflict in the Middle East. And one thing is clear, and that's the American people are sick and tired of being at war in the Middle East. So please get in touch with Biden, get in touch with your members of Congress, tell them that you don't support this and you're not going to stand for it.
Thank you very much, Brian. Yeah, it's an urgent call. It's such an outrage that NATO isn't enough, expanding NATO. Now he wants a NATO for the Middle East, for Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Okay, next we have Cole Harrison, Executive Director of Massachusetts Peace Action. He's going to bring us up to date on the crisis in Ukraine.
Thanks, Marcy. Things are going from bad to worse in Ukraine. The war is escalating. Biden has committed $1 more billion of military aid to Ukraine this week, which includes anti-ship systems to attack the Russian fleet, to break the blockade in the Black Sea. Our action tonight that we're going to ask you to take targets this issue and ask them not to do this. And I'm going to take a moment to put that in the chat. This is an action page that you can use to send a message to President Biden and to Secretary of State Blinken about this issue of naval warfare in the Black Sea. Secondarily, we have the International Day of Action on Saturday on Ukraine, for peace in Ukraine. Our position is peace talks now, not weapons. I'm tripping over these sounds tonight. Peace talks now, not weapons shipments. The world needs peace in Ukraine. We have a number of rallies on Thursday and also on Saturday. And please go to peaceinukraine.org to see those actions, to participate in an action in your community, or to post an action if you can organize an action in your community. We provide flyers and petitions that you can use during your action. Attorney General Merrick Garland was in Ukraine today to meet with the Ukrainian war crimes prosecutor. They're preparing to try to escalate the war crimes issue. Of course, there have been war crimes committed in the Ukraine war. War itself is a war crime. A war that's the crime of aggression. It's against international law to launch an aggressive attack. But at this time, what we need is peace negotiations. When you start lining up the opposing politicians and convicting them of war crimes, they're not going to negotiate with you. So that is folly, and we should not be doing that. So that's where we are. We held a gathering on Sunday convened by CODEPINK, at which we rejuvenated more people to join our Peace in Ukraine coalition. We welcome more people to join us. We do need more local groups, more groups of all kinds to come together and push for peace in Ukraine. And I guess, Marcy, you've called a meeting for tomorrow afternoon. So we're going to get together and work on those plans. So please join us.
Thank you for that update, Cole. Yeah, I'll post in the chat how to get in touch with me if you'd like to join that meeting tomorrow or your organization would like to be represented. I will also be hosting a tweet-a-thon. Some of you participated last time during our International Day of Action. This, again, we'll be tweeting to Secretary of State Blinken and President Biden, his Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, to some of the media, urging them to support negotiations, not escalation, and to feature guests who will espouse that as well. And do stay with us for the action tonight. You know, Putin has said he will ease off on the blockade of the Black Sea if President Biden will lift some of the US sanctions that are impeding the flow of Russia's agricultural products and fertilizer. And the Biden administration has made it very clear they're not interested in doing that. They want to simply send anti-ship missile systems to destroy the Russian fleet, which does not bode well. So stay tuned and we'll take action on that. At this point, we're going to go back to Cole to introduce our first guest for our program, NATO, What is Wrong with It?
Thank you, Marcy. Our first speaker tonight is Ajamu Baraka. He is the national organizer of the Black Alliance for Peace, and he was the 2016 candidate for Vice President of the United States on the Green Party ticket. He serves on the executive committee of the U.S. Peace Council and on the leadership body of the United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC, and the steering committee of the Black is Back Coalition. He's an editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda Report and was awarded the U.S. Peace Memorial 2019 Peace Prize and the Serena Sherm Award for Uncompromised Integrity in Journalism. Ajamu calls NATO an existential threat to peoples and nations throughout the global South. Ajamu Baraka.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cole. It's good to see you, at least on Zoom again. I'm really honored to be with all of the activists and organizations that pulled this conversation together. Especially always honored to be with our militant allies from CODEPINK, Medea, folks who are always prepared to put their bodies on the line for peace, something that all of us on this call are committed to. So it's an honor to be with all my old friends that I see here, people who are in the trenches, struggling to try to build a new world. So we're going to talk about NATO at a very critical moment in history. It's very, very difficult to talk about NATO. It's always been somewhat difficult, but even more difficult today as a consequence of the conflict in Ukraine. But we have no other choice but to, in fact, do that. As peace activists, as anti-war activists, even anti-imperialist activists, we have a responsibility to call it as we see it. And we understand the role of NATO. We understand that this is a structure that is not a friend to the people, that it in fact represents the military and material means for how the US is able to, and Europeans are able to project their power across the planet. I only have a few minutes, so I want to just very quickly just share with you how I came to understand NATO. First, I was aware of NATO, of course, but I first became really aware of it when, as a young a member of the United States of America's military force, a part of the occupation force in Germany. And we knew that NATO was standing off against the Warsaw Pact. And, you know, that was understandable, even though some of us who were becoming political never believed there was going to be a ground war in Europe. But we really began to understand, though, that NATO was more than just that. We came to that understanding when we found out, for example, that NATO was in fact helping to prop up, to support the attempts by the Portuguese in Africa to maintain their colonial possessions. In the unit that I was in, they had individuals in our unit and another aviation unit that was providing training to Portuguese pilots who were then actively involved in killing African people on the African continent. So that was the beginning of us understanding that this structure wasn't just about Europe. It wasn't just about North Atlanta. It was in fact about maintaining U.S. and European white supremacist power, and that was a very important understanding. And it's the foundation of why, as Cole shared with you, we believe in the Black Alliance for Peace, for example, that NATO represents part of the threat to global humanity because it is a projection of U.S. power and committed to using U.S. military power. It is a threat to all of us. We know that that's the case, and that's why we connect up NATO as part of what we refer to as the U.S. EU NATO axis of domination. And we see this as a criminal enterprise that has to be disbanded. We don't need to go through some of the bloody history of NATO beyond North Atlantic, including the war on Libya and Afghanistan. But we have to be, we would be remiss if we didn't comment, as has already been brought up, about NATO in places like Latin America. We all saw the fantastic consequence of the election in Colombia, but many people don't know that just a month or so before the first round of the election, Joe Biden and Joe Biden administration brought representatives from the Colombian government to DC to announce that Colombia is going to be promoted from just a global NATO partner to a major non-NATO ally. And many of us understood what that really was. Francia Marquez, the new vice president, called it as it was. She said, this is an attempt at interference. This was an attempt to do a wink and a nod to the right wing to tell them basically whatever happens in the election, you all take care of business and don't worry about any major intervention from us because you are an important ally to us. That is the right wing in Colombia. So we have to raise these issues in terms of really helping people to understand the true nature of this structure. And lastly, as I go toward the end here, AFRICOM. AFRICOM, in fact, many people don't know, AFRICOM is in fact a creation of NATO. The European Command, the that was responsible for 42 nations on the African continent. Basically, he sort of farmed out that responsibility to this new specific Africa Command, AFRICOM. And we know about what is happening on the African continent with the expansion of the U.S. military presence, and the kinds of results that happens when you see an expansion of the U.S. footprint. We see net stability, but instability, and more violence. So, my friends, we have a lot of work to do to deal with this structure, to help people to understand what it really means, to help people understand that one of the reasons why we have a NATO is that there is a policy commitment to the attempt on the part of the U.S. and Western European powers to maintain their global hegemony through by any means necessary. But the main means they want to use is military. They are committed to a military first strategy in order to realize their national security strategy, which is what? Full spectrum dominance. They don't hide this. It's not something that we have to, unearth through an investigation. They say in their policy positions, we about global domination, okay? And either you're with us or you're not. So I'm so happy tonight to be with people on this call who say that, no, we're not going to be with that. We're going to be with the people. We're going to be with the people who want to see peace, who want to see a resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, for example, that will be something that will result in a sustained peace. We're not going to fall for the propaganda that has us calling for more an expanded war in Ukraine. We want to see the killing stop in Ukraine and really across the globe. And we take up that task to ensure that happens gladly. As human beings, we are part of a collective humanity with responsibilities that we really can't walk away from. So let's talk about how we do this tonight, my friends. Let's commit ourselves or recommit ourselves to building a powerful anti-war and pro-peace and even anti-imperialist movement. We have the responsibilities because we're at the center of empire. So let's take care of those responsibilities. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't go too far over my time.
You did not.
Okay.
You were perfect. Thank you so much, Ajamu Baraka, for cutting to the quick. This is about global domination, and we need a strong anti-war movement. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to keep building this. Thank you. And now, before we go forward, I just wanted to mention, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, that there is a big NATO summit in Madrid, June 28th to 30th. And that's why, in part, we are hosting this event tonight, because we want to give voice to the counter narrative. With that, I turn it over to Medea to introduce a wonderful CODEPINK activist and friend.
Thank you so much, Ajamu. It is amazing that your first encounter with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is in Africa. And there you are. We're in Colombia, where you see NATO again. So this idea that it's even the North Atlantic is just a false notion. And we have our next speaker, somebody who has encountered NATO all over the world as well. That is Colonel Ann Wright. She spent 13 years in the U.S. Army, 16 more years in the Army Reserves, retiring as a colonel. We don't hold it against her. She was also in the State Department for 16 years, served as deputy ambassador in Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Afghanistan, Mongolia. And what I consider a great thing she did is resign on the eve of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, March 19th, 2003, saying that it was an illegal intervention. And since then has been devoted to peace in a way that is unrivaled. She is a wonderful key person within CODEPINK and also within Veterans for Peace. And she could probably spend her 10 minutes naming off all of the other organizations you're part of. So thank you so much for joining us, Ann.
Thank you, Medea, and thanks to all of the CODEPINK Congress for hosting this. It is really important, that we watch NATO. Like Ajamu, when I was in the military, I actually was in a NATO unit. It was the Allied Forces Central Europe. So I've been around this NATO octopus for quite a while. What I'm going to talk about, though, is how, as Ajamu mentioned, that NATO has gone down into Africa, and now one country in Latin America is a part of NATO. I'm going to talk about what's going on out in the Pacific, where I live. I live in Hawaii, and I will talk to you about what's happening in Hawaii. Let's see if I can get this thing to kind of turn off so you don't see all the slides. Oh, forget it. You can see them. Okay. NATO's in the Pacific. I thought it was called the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations. Well, hell no. It's the North Pacific Treaty Organization now, because they're coming right on over to the Pacific. The Indo-Pacific Command, which is a military command for half of the Earth, all of the Pacific and all the way over to India, with military bases in Japan, in Korea, in Guam, in Australia, of course, a huge number in Hawaii, and looking at all of the region that it covers. So a lot of little hot spots. If we look at this one, North Korea, and I'm going to go through these slides really fast because I want to get to the very end of it. But North Korea sending off ballistic missiles, trying to get the attention of the United States again, after Trump kind of talked with them in person for 3 times, but Biden has not said diddly squat to them. So what does the U.S. do when these ballistic missiles go off? And let's just mention that in the last 3.5 years, the North Koreans have not tested any nuclear weapons, and until just about 4 months ago, they had not tested any more ballistic missiles. But the U.S. now has sent 2 aircraft carriers. This is a picture of one of them off the coast of South Korea. What this all is leading toward is what the huge military buildup that there is in the Western Pacific. Our focus is really on the Ukraine and Russia. But when you really look at what's going on in the Western Pacific, it is every bit as dangerous and could disintegrate into what we've seen in Ukraine very, very easily. Right now, we look at the Straits of Taiwan, this little tiny, what the Chinese call a rogue province. The United States has had a 40-year policy called One China, where we do not diplomatically recognize Taiwan, which is an economic powerhouse that produces most of the things that go into computers, little network things and all that sort of stuff, for both the computers in China that come over to the United States. Well, the United States has been sending in the highest level of diplomats we have ever sent in 40 years, and we've sent congressional delegations, all of which angers the Chinese, and they have been responding by sending fleets of 50 aircraft at a time across the 20 miles of the straits, the Formosa Straits, or now the Taiwan Straits, going right to the air defense zone of Taiwan. The U.S. is poking its finger in the eye of the Chinese, trying to get, in my opinion, just as they did for Russia, they're trying to do the same thing for China, using Taiwan as a method to get China to react militarily, which is going to be horrible. Let's just hope the Chinese have better sense than the Russians did on this thing, I'll tell you. The other hotspot, South China Sea, where China has built on small atolls about 9 small military bases. The U.S. has 800 military bases around the world. The Chinese has had 1 in Djibouti. Well, now they have in these tiny little atolls in the South China Sea, in contested area for sure. Vietnam contests it, the Philippines contest it, but the Chinese have built up these atolls so that they can be used for the military. They've got ports, and they've got landing fields in there. If we look, let's see if we can go down to the next one. Solomon Islands. Whoever has heard of the Solomon Islands? Well, it's a hot spot because the Chinese is taking a playbook from the United States on aid to countries and security pacts. The U.S. has security pacts with all sorts of people. The Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, Palau. These are the 3 countries the U.S. has had security relationships with for since really World War II. In fact, I was assigned as a diplomat out here in the Federated States of Micronesia. The U.S. owns the security rights to this whole huge amount of the Pacific. Well, the Chinese went down to the Solomon Islands and talked to the Solomon Islanders about perhaps they would have a national security agreement for. It didn't really say defense, but it said, to help you out in case you have natural disasters and things like that. Well, of course, that infuriated who? The United States. And they sent a huge delegation. The U.S. has never had an embassy in the Solomon Islands, but now, guess what? The U.S. is going to do that because China has gone in there. Well, and this is just another look at areas that we don't really watch on the map, yet they are very, very important areas that may come back to haunt us in a way. Palau, this one of the Compact of Free Association countries, has already told the United States it can build a port and an airport there. The Federated States of Micronesia has said, yes, if you all want to build something, go right ahead. So the U.S. is building out in the Western Pacific also. If you look to the map on the right, this is a map that shows the Marianas Trench, the deepest hole in the earth that doesn't go right into the center of the earth, I guess. And it's where Guam, the territory of Guam is. And Guam is becoming a micro, although they would say it wouldn't really be a micro, it is a huge military base on a tiny little island. It has nuclear submarines, a submarine base, a naval base. It has B-52 bombers. They've now assigned 6 Reaper assassin drones into Guam. It's the place where Kim Jong-un of North Korea said, we now have ballistic missiles that can blow up Guam. So Guam is also the location of the first, the newest U.S. Marine base in the world. The first time in 50 years, the Marines have built a new base, and it's on Guam. So this little place is really absorbing a heck of a lot of U.S. militarism. In the Pacific, we are now going to be having, starting June 29th through August 4th, the largest naval exercises in the world. It's called Rim of the Pacific, and it will be having 26 countries with 25,000 military personnel that will be in and out of Honolulu, 38 ships, 4 submarines, 170 aircraft, and 9 nations that will be doing ground maneuvers or amphibious landings. And guess what? NATO is involved in it. Big old NATO is there because 8 of the NATO countries, Canada, Colombia, Denmark, France, Germany, the Netherlands, should have Italy in here, the UK and the US have their ships there, plus the 4 Asia Pacific partners of NATO, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. So what do they do in these military war games? They blow off missiles. They practice sinking ships. They send troops ashore in amphibious landings, which is essentially the new policy for the Marine Corps, is to have small groups of people that can invade small islands, bring in drones, and wait in hiding, so to speak, for enemy forces to come by where they'll blow them up. What else will they blow up? The cetaceans, the whales, the dolphins, the turtles. The numbers of marine mammals that are killed in these military exercises is large. And what we're finding out in the war between Ukraine and Russia, over 80 dolphins have floated ashore in the Black Sea because of all of the military engagement that's going on, of blowing up ships and firing into the waters, and blowing up eardrums, sonars, things like that. Well, what do we want to do about it? We want to cancel it. In Hawaii, we have, and in the Western Pacific, we have a big program called Cancel RIMPAC. And if you take a look at the drawings, our artists have reworked the official logo, the official military logo of RIMPAC. We've got catastrophic, aggressive, cancel these things. And over on the one on the right, you have the ships out of the scene, and you've got whales and dolphins and turtles and birds living in a peaceful Pacific, something that NATO and the US does not want. What are we doing? Well, we're having protests. We're having good protests in Hawaii, and they've had protests in Guam, in South Korea. The activism, we've got a petition. We'd love for you all to sign it. It's got about 3,000 people on it. In 2020, which is the last time RIMPAC had it, we had 13,000. So we need for all of you all to sign this, and we'll put it in the chat. We have a Pacific Peace Network of organizations in Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Guam, Hawaii, that are working in each of our countries to educate our communities as to the dangers of these military war maneuvers. Not only RIMPAC of the Pacific, the largest naval war practice in the world, but the United States sponsors about 200 military exercises in the Pacific and in Asia each year. We have a poem of the Indigenous Voices of the Pacific that is a beautiful one, and we'll put that in so you all can see it. Now, what are we doing about it on an international level? As Marcy said, there is a NATO meeting next weekend in Madrid, Spain, and our organization called No to War, No to NATO will be meeting in Madrid. We'll be having two types of peace summits. We'll be having a march and a rally on Saturday in Madrid. Here's one of the flyers that we have for the Peace Summit, No to NATO. So the conclusion is, while things are going on in Eastern Europe between Ukraine and Russia, and we certainly need to focus on that and try to get our government from stop spending so much money for the continued destruction of people and things there. There are a lot of hotspots that are out in the Western Pacific between North Korea, Taiwan, the South China Sea. We've got to stop all this, stop all the wars, and abolish all the military bases. So with that, this is the picture of this indigenous poem that talks about RIMPAC and shows many of the scenes of the destruction that RIMPAC causes. It's another statement that we have is being done by Women's Voices, Women Speak, a group of women from all over the Pacific. So with that, I will stop and say no to NATO in the Atlantic, no to NATO in the Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. We are so honored to have you with us. Your experience as an ambassador, a diplomat, an anti-war activist, and thank you for drawing our attention to what's happening in the Western Pacific. Once they finish with Russia, they want to go into the Western Pacific. All right. Our next speaker will be introduced by Hania Jodat.
Thank you. That was Anne Wright, everybody. I also want to thank you for your advocacy, your knowledge, and desire for peace. If you have a petition that you would like for our audience members to sign, please do share in the chat. Just recently, Anne, Medea, and I shared a virtual stage with the great Dan Ellsberg, Norman Solomon of Roots Action, David Swanson of World Beyond War, and a number of incredible activist speakers to discuss the threat of nuclear war and weapons. So Anne is a nuclear weapon abolitionist as well. And this event that we hosted was hosted by Roots Action and co-sponsored by 90 plus organizations. It brings me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Alice Slater, who serves on the board of directors of World Beyond War and the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. She is the UN NGO representative of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation and is on the advisory board of Nuclear Ban US, supporting the mission of the international campaigns to abolish nuclear weapons, which won the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize for its work in realizing the successful UN negotiation for a treaty for prohibition of nuclear weapons. As a member of the Lawyers Alliances for Nuclear Arms Control, Alice traveled to Russia and to China on a delegations engaged in ending the arms race and banning the bomb. She served on the People's Climate Committee in New York City, working for 100% green energy by 2030. Please take it away, Alice.
Thank you. I feel I'm in such incredible company tonight. You know, I'm thinking about history right now. We're really at a turning point here in the United States. It's now been revealed for everybody to see that we aren't really an exceptional democracy. I mean, everybody's getting that now. I mean, besides the shocking events of an insurrection in our capital in January 6th and the incomprehensible reactions to those events, splitting our body politic into bloody parts, our history is catching up with us as we're looking at the continued oppression of our Black citizens, the renewed racial stereotyping and outrageous injury to our Asian citizens, the continued mistreatment of our indigenous natives who survived the slaughter of the colonialist patriarchy landing on the shore, the denial of citizenships to women all those years, a battle we thought we had won, which has to be fought all over again now as the patriarchy rears its ugly head, stripping even the illusion of democracy we thought we had, and powered by corrupt corporate marauders protected by a judicial system, media, and government that offer no vision or help to ordinary people or any path forward to cooperative and meaningful actions to avoid a cataclysm of nuclear war or catastrophic climate collapse, not to mention the spreading plague that we seem so inept at dealing with because of corporate greed and misplaced priorities. It seems like America got rid of a king only to wind up with a tyrannical cabal of the Mickey Man. What Ray McGovern, founder of Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, defined as the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academic think tank complex. And this is what we're dealing with. We have this wall of misinformation, and like the rest of the world is seeing it. I mean, if you read what China and Russia are saying, they're making excellent sense, but you can't hear about it. For instance, they've been saying, and what the nuclear weapons is something I'm very familiar with, and there are 14,000 on the planet right now, and 13,000 are in the US and Russia. You know, all the other 7 countries, England, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea, have 1,000 between them. And us in Russia, we have them pointed at each other on hair trigger alert, ready to go off. Whereas the Chinese are very sensible. They keep their bombs separated from their missiles. And they don't, they have to literally, if they're going to use it, they got to put it on. We're ready to go. The point is that this NATO alliance was something that should have been disbanded when the Cold War ended. I mean, Gorbachev let go of all of Eastern Europe without a shot. And it was like a miracle how it just dissolved. And he was very concerned about a unified Germany going into NATO because Russia lost 27 million people during World War II to the Nazi onslaught. I mean, how many people ever heard that figure of 27 million? And Reagan said, don't worry about it. Let us put a unified Germany into NATO, and we give you our word, we will not expand 1 inch to the east. And we took every single country in right up to Russia's border. And Ukraine is like, if Russia were to take Canada or Mexico into their military alliance. And you know what happened when they tried to do with Cuba. So NATO has a nuclear sharing policy. Like they have an alliance where anybody who's a member of NATO is under our nuclear umbrella. And we actually, and not only NATO, there were 3 Pacific countries, Japan of all places, South Korea, and Australia are under our nuclear umbrella. So they don't have to get their own nukes. We'll use them on their behalf. And we talk about it, we strategize it. I was just reading, they came out with the NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements. They have all these information. And we actually keep them in 5 European NATO states. The US keeps nuclear weapons in Germany, Belgium, Holland, Turkey, and Italy. And we wonder why Putin's telling us don't do Ukraine. I mean, nobody's seeing this. We have to somehow tell the right story, because we're not telling that right story, particularly with the nuclear. But I don't even want to say nuclear, because the climate catastrophe is right upon us. And we're literally drilling for more oil, because we're sanctioning Russia's oil. So now we have to find more oil and gas instead of everybody moving together towards all the solutions that already exist to avoid the destruction of the planet. They also put out, I've been looking into this because I didn't know that much about NATO. NATO 2030. They've got their plans for NATO 2030. What is 2030? It's an ambitious agenda to make sure NATO remains ready, strong, and united for a new era of increased global competition. I mean, this is crazy talk. That's their opening statement. We do not need global competition right now. We need global cooperation. It's like people can see it, and we're not. Somebody said, how do we change it? I think we have to really be very careful about changing our message and getting some kind of a meme, like that movie, Don't Look Up. Did you all see it? I mean, it wasn't such a good movie, but the idea was that terrible things are happening, and the president's in bed with the corporations, and the media is talking about nonsense and not telling you what's going on. And a few people know the truth and they can't get the message through, and we're moving for destruction kind of thing. And I think the media is one of the biggest problems right now, just the way they're talking about it. And I mean, I've been doing so much about nuclear, but I didn't know that much about NATO. I mean, if you look at their NATO 2030, they're strengthening deterrence and defense, pledge and continue to meet the NATO agreed guidelines of spending 2% of gross domestic product on defense and 20% of annual defense spending on major new equipment. I mean, they're budgeting it. Who's writing this thing? Lockheed Martin, Raytheon? I mean, they're telling everybody what they got to spend. Preserve our technological edge. This is so interesting. Russia and China have been tabling a treaty in the Committee on Disarmament in Geneva to negotiate to keep weapons out of space. And in order to discuss it in Geneva, you need consensus in this committee. The US vetoes it. We won't even let them talk about it. And when the US boasted with Israel about our Stuxnet virus, how we knocked out Iran's enrichment plant, we hacked it, Putin called Obama and said, let's negotiate a cyber ban. Not interested. And China and Russia are talking about a cyber ban treaty. They gave this terrific speech at the Olympics, their new partnership, the two of them met during the Olympics about, we need cooperation, we need space. And what happened to the United Nations? I mean, now is established to end the scourge of war. All of a sudden, we're coming up with this rules-based, what is that? I mean, we should not accept that. We should like step on it every time they say it. I mean, that's just like bullying. We're going to make up our own rules. We got the guns, we'll have the rules. I mean, Clinton was the first really big offender, because when he bombed Kosovo over Russia's veto in the Security Council, because they were friendly with the other side, we have a treaty with the United Nations that we will never commit a war of aggression unless we're under imminent threat of attack. And Clinton said, screw you, and walked out and did it anyway, and brought NATO along with him. And now, of course, we're expanding NATO. So we're having right now, there's a fabulous meeting going on, this treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, to ban the bomb. 122 countries voted for it. Iran was a wonderful participant. North Korea voted to go ahead on the negotiations. Did you see that in the New York Times? The first vote in the General Assembly, the Western states, the US, Russia, Israel, and France voted no. China, India, and Pakistan abstained. They had a vote in the General Assembly in 2016 whether we should go forward with negotiation. And North Korea voted yes, we should ban the bomb. They're just trying to get our attention. You know, they're waving that missile around. And Trump, the broken clock, was trying to make a deal. He's going to win a Nobel Peace Prize. And he makes a deal with Kim Jong that he'll take 10,000 of the 38,000 troops out of North Korea, that, you know, the South Korean border that's in the demilitarized zone since 1953. And, you know, as a gesture of good faith, we'll have only 28,000 instead of 30. And the Congress voted against him. Democrats and Republicans did not let him take one soldier out of, and now we're taking all these countries into NATO. So I don't know what the answer is. I just know the questions, and I know we have all the solutions. We have them.
Right.
We have solutions for the climate. We have solutions for the COVID. You know, we have all these things. We have Russia and China willing partners. They're saying they'll talk about nuclear disarmament if we promise not to dominate space or cooperate on cyber war. And, you know, we walked out of one treaty after another. The anti-ballistic missile treaty, we put missiles in Poland, Romania. So who's going to talk peace if we're doing that, you know? So
Exactly. Good point.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Alice. And I'm glad you delineated where those nuclear weapons are, because one of the biggest complaints I have against NATO, as you know, is that they are very opposed to this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Yeah.
they don't want to give them up.
That's right. All right. Brian is going to take us to the action now. And then after that, we will return to our guests and we'll open it up for questions and have a very lively discussion. Brian Garvey.
You want me to follow that, Marcy?
Yeah.
All right, I guess I'll do my the speakers were amazing. But this is my favorite part, because this is when you use that knowledge that you just gained and the motivation from our brilliant speakers and turn it into some action. Because we know that we were just talking about, all our speakers were talking about the interconnectedness of the world. And, you know, it truly is a global economy that we live in. The world is smaller in a way. And, you know, the world is marching towards starvation, and we need to end this damn war in Ukraine to stop it. And those aren't my words. Those are the words of the head of the UN's World Food Program, David Beasley, who is such a lefty radical. He used to be the Republican governor of South Carolina. And this is what he's saying. It gets back to the interconnectedness of the world. You know, this war in Ukraine and the blockade of the Black Sea is affecting so much of the world, because so much of the world's food comes from that region. Just from Ukraine, it's almost 10% of the world's wheat, 16% of the maize, 42% of the sunflower oil, and even more importantly, it's 70% of the wheat for the Emergency Relief Fund of the UN comes from this region. So we need to end this war as soon as possible, so people, you know, all over the Middle East and Africa have access to this food. So Marcy wrote a great action. It is a letter to the Biden administration and the Secretary of State and his national security advisor, and to NATO as well, telling them that they need to change course on this because we're marching towards starvation. People in Ethiopia, people in Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Yemen, they rely on this food from the region, from Ukraine, from Russia, and these folks are going to be in big trouble if this war continues. But right now, as we were saying earlier, the Biden administration is talking about giving anti-ship missiles to Ukraine, about giving long-range rockets to Ukraine. They're talking about escalating this war so the people who make those weapons can make a boatload of money. And that is going to come at the expense of people who are already starving. 650 million to 810 million increase in chronic hunger just in the past 5 years. In that same period of time, 80 to now 325 million people are experiencing shock hunger. That means they don't know where their next meal is coming from. These are our brothers and sisters. And if this war doesn't end, it's going to get worse. So we need to call for negotiations to stop this war, for a ceasefire to be put in place as soon as possible, because the food needs to come out of the Black Sea and get to Africa and get to the Middle East before it's too late. Escalating this war is not a good idea. It risks nuclear conflict. It's going to get a lot more people in Ukraine killed if this war is prolonged. So just take a couple of minutes. It doesn't even take that long. All you need to do is put your address in. A letter comes up, and you can send it to the Biden administration, telling them change course. Do not escalate this war. And with enough political pressure, that's how you change the minds of politicians.
Brian, Shay, I'm going to ask that we repost. So there it is, every action. Yeah, it's right there. So
really easy and quick.
Very quick, one click, you send the message to President Biden, knock it off with sending these anti-ship missiles. They think they're going to destroy the Russian fleet and there won't be any retaliation. They think they're going to destroy the Russian fleet and then they'll be able to send the grain to the Middle East and Africa. It's insanity. Total insanity. So in a little while, Brian will update us to tell us how many have actually signed and sent that message. So please do, and also amplify it, send it to friends, post it on social media and so forth. Thank you so much, Brian. So you can continue to sign that.
Jump in on that, Marcy, is that we have 82 submitted already, but there are 292 people on this Zoom. So we would like to get to at least 200. So we need a lot more people to take the action, click, and send off the message, please.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you, Brian. All right, we're going to turn now to our Q&A session. Medea and I will ask some questions of our guests, so maybe we can highlight all of our guests. We have Alice Slater, we just heard from, a board member of World Beyond War. We have Colonel Ann Wright, former diplomat, CODEPINK activist. We have Ajamu Baraka, national organizer for Black Alliance for Peace. So I'll start off with a question, and please feel free to post your questions in the chat. Medea will follow up. So I know there's some frustration. You know, we know the crimes, right? We know the crimes of NATO, or at least many of us do. And we know the crimes of the United States. Where are the weak links? Let's take NATO. Where are the weak links? Where could we be effective in dismantling or weakening NATO? Big question.
Well, I think this webinar is a beginning. You have 300 people hearing us talking, you know, and I guess I don't know the weak links.
Well, I think we need to focus a lot on the countries of NATO that are allowing these new NATO bases to be built. I think the people in Poland, the people in Romania are kind of like the people in Japan and South Korea and other places where the U.S. has built bases. They really don't want them there, and they've suffered under the oppression of the military that gets away with sexual assault, that gets away with robberies, that gets away with murder, environmental stuff. So one part of it would be trying to focus on those areas around the new NATO bases.
Thank you.
If I can add real quickly, I think we need to remind ourselves that the opposition to NATO puts us on the side of the majority of humanity. And what that suggests strategically is that we can strengthen our ties with organizations, peoples, and nations in the global South that don't have to engage in long and torturous conversations about the nature of this structure. So, you know, all of this keeps coming back to one specific need. We have to build a more effective global anti-war movement, and that movement has to have as its base more presence, more participation from peoples, movements, and nations from the global South.
Thank you, Ajamu. So what I heard was more education, focus on the newer countries where NATO bases, US bases are being built, and international solidarity, a global anti-war movement.
We also have to get the top PR advertising. We got to get a meme. We have to get something that's going to break through, because we are like on this media assault on our brains. I mean, we're so brainwashed here. I can't talk to my own children about this. You know, Putin's bad. He's a murderer. He's terror. You know, I mean, they don't want to hear one good thing about Russia. You know, or China now. Now China also. And I don't know how to. I know I'm not answering the question, but I think we have to think about it.
Well, I think
Before I go to my question, I just wanted to ask Ajamu about Colombia. Do you think the new president, Petro, will do something about the alliance with NATO?
Well, he indicated clearly on the night that they won that he was going to address this issue of Colombia's relationship to NATO.
Right.
So yes, I think that in fact will happen. There's enough support for that to happen. And the politics of the region suggest that for him to maintain any kind of credibility in the region as a progressive, he has to address this issue of NATO. So yes, I think there will be some motion on this situation with Colombia and NATO.
Thank you, because I think when we address this issue of weak links, we have to look at the strong progressive movements in different parts of the world, and how, as you talk about, Ajamu, the international solidarity, they can give us a lot of strength. So I want to move on to a question that somebody asked that I think is a really important one. And this is, why are Eastern European nations so anxious to be part of NATO? And I'll throw in there, why do Finland and Sweden want to be part of NATO? If NATO is so bad, why are these countries clamoring to get in? And why don't we start with you, Anne?
Well, unfortunately, the decision of the Russian government to invade Ukraine has put us back into kind of the Cold War of 40 years ago, where countries of Western Europe were concerned about Russia involvement, and then those countries that were a part of the Warsaw Pact, who have now come out of the Warsaw Pact and are independent countries, they know exactly what has happened to countries that were under the old Soviet domination, and I think they're very fearful that since the Russian government decided to go ahead and invade parts of Ukraine, that it just might happen to them too. So they're just joining up in anticipation. Well, let's hope it's not in anticipation, but as a preventive measure, I guess. But it certainly has not helped us. I mean, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has really undercut all we've been trying to do, saying no to NATO, because now so many countries are saying, well, see, that's exactly what NATO was for, not recognizing that NATO had a great deal to do with the whole decision of the Russian government to go into Ukraine, something I don't agree with, but that's one of their rationales.
Thank you.
I think also there was like a great media push. Chomsky said he Googled the word unprovoked, and it was like 1,300,000 times when they described Putin's unprovoked attack on Ukraine, and they never gave any of the context of what was going on with Russia when that happened at that moment, and everybody bought it. There's been huge. And Eastern Europe, of course, they were occupied by the Soviet Union. They love NATO. We walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty that we had with the Soviets since 1972 and put missiles into Poland and Romania against Putin's wishes, So they had a lot of hatred for Russia, and a lot of them were helping Hitler march his way into Russia. There's not such great feeling from those.
Question. A lot of people will say we need NATO because Russia is an imperialist power and an aggressor and a war, Putin's a war criminal. And you cannot negotiate. This comes back at me all the time on Twitter. You cannot negotiate with someone like Hitler, Putin. And I say, well, look, we've had treaties with Russia before. We have one right now. We have the START treaty. What would you say in response to these arguments?
Well, I'd say they'd better look and count out the number of times the U.S. has invaded and occupied countries versus the number of times that Russia and China have done the same thing. The U.S. has invaded and occupied many, many more countries than Russia has. Russia did go into Georgia. They have annexed Crimea, and one would say peacefully. There was a plebiscite of the people in Crimea. It wasn't like it was an invasion as such, although it's being portrayed that way. But several of us were in Crimea in 2016 on a trip and talked to lots and lots of people in Crimea, and it was not a violent takeover or anything like that. Whereas the United States is the one that has been marauding around the world as a warmonger.
Thank you. Ajamu.
Yes, I think it's a very difficult task that we have because, as someone said, the populations in the U.S. and Europe have been bombarded with war propaganda. I mean, once you have conflict, once it begins and the bombs are dropping and bullets are flying, it's so difficult for the average person to discriminate in terms of, what's what, who's right, who's wrong. But when you have an international platform like what we have with the U.S. and Western Europe to construct a narrative, and that narrative is one in which they want to whip up support for continued conflict, is a very, very difficult task to try to counter that. And especially when you have an attractive spokesperson like a Zelensky beating the war drums and being touted as this Churchillian whatever. And it's a very difficult task, but it's one that we have to take on. We have to take on and not be afraid of the criticism that will be directed toward us for being quote unquote anti-American or anti-West. But we have to take that task on and to contextualize what is really unfolding in the world. The U.S. has no moral standing to be able to talk about war crimes. Has no moral standing to suggest that a nation is beyond negotiation, not after the kinds of crimes that we all know that this state has been involved in. And you have to lay it out, you have to lay it out clearly in those terms. The people of the planet can no longer afford U.S. innocence. We can't afford for people to believe that they are some kind of way the paragons of democracy and human rights. It is a lie. Your state is a criminal, ongoing criminal enterprise. And you have to begin to have the courage to lay that out in that way, because the stakes are so incredibly high for the majority of humanity. It's quite clear that the US and European powers have decided that they are prepared to blow up the entire world before they see the end of white world supremacy. And so, it's a difficult task, but it's one we have to take on for our future, because these folks are so incompetent. It's so dangerous that the possibility of escalation to a nuclear confrontation, as many of us know, has never been this high before. And so when you talk to people, they talk about what they're going to be doing in 2 months or next year. And I'm saying, are you sure you're going to be here? Do you understand what is unfolding? People have to be shaken out of their complacency. So yeah, we have that task, and it's a difficult one because you will find yourself in the crosshairs of irrational criticism.
We are.
Yeah.
But I was thinking of a thing. I was so appalled at the daily photographs of the blue-eyed, blonde-haired children, day after day after day. Where are the Yemeni children? Where are the Somali children? Why don't we have pictures in the New York Times? In other words, let's do that. Let's put that out. There's something crazy about this propaganda,
Yeah, somebody posted, that was Don Smith, I stand with Yemen. Yes, we all stand with Yemen and that War Powers Resolution. We're going to try to get more co-sponsors for that.
No, but where are the kids from Yemen in our daily papers? I was getting New York Times like 40 pictures a day of these beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed children. I mean, it was like sickening. It was just sick. It was so obvious.
No, it's all horrific. Medea, did you have a question?
No, I think we've gone over our time.
Okay.
So when you take us out, Marcy, I do just want to say that it is exciting that there's going to be counter summits in Madrid coming up. There are going to be people on the streets protesting. There's going to be a 24-hour wave of peace going around the world that you can all be part of. And we should post that in the chat. And Marcy, you want to take us out?
Sure. And Anne, you're going to be attending some of those summits, right?
Yes, I'm going to be. And Packy Whalen is on the Zoom. She's going. Joseph Garrison's going. Joe Lombardo, Kala Walsh. I think those are the 5 that I know of from the U.S. And there will be a large presence of people from all over Europe, probably in the thousands. Let's hope.
That's inspiring. Inspiring. Thank you for going and representing us, Anne and Packy. We appreciate that. All right, we're going to close out tonight.
Plead once more for people to take the action. We're up to 181. We just need 19 more people to take the action. We'll reach our goal.
Excellent. Thanks for the update. Okay, let's unmute and thank our guests.
Woohoo!
Yes.
Bravo. Great job, guys.
Bravo. Bravo.
Thank you.
Heroes.
Thank you.
Well done. Great. And do we have John taking us out with music, Marcy?
Yeah, John Douglas is with us tonight.
Hi,
John.